little wispy curls, and his daddy can dress him up in his Ringer's outfit with a pirate and the black tracksuit. And when we take him down to 4th Street, all the ladies say, "Oh, she's so beautiful, isn't she?" And then his daddy says, "His name is Augustus," and they say, "Augusta, that's such a pretty name. You're so pretty, aren't you, sweetheart?" And during childhood, essentially what happens is that you see the same kind of pattern. So all the way up to adolescence, you're seeing boys and girls being similar, although boys are stronger. In terms of cognitive abilities and academic achievement, you see during childhood, you see these similarities in intelligence and cognitive functioning, but in fact, and increasingly, you see girls doing better in school than boys are doing. So the kinds of places where you do see differences, boys being more involved in rough and tumble play and sort of raw motor activities, girls being more involved in fine motor activity and social play, mean that in a school, people who are running around all the time and climbing on the climbing frame are more likely to get into trouble than people who are sitting and doing things in a small scale kind of way. In language, girls are doing better pretty consistently all the way from elementary school through to high school. So if you're looking at language development, when you see a sex difference, it's in favor of girls. And on the other hand, when you look at some aspects of visual spatial processing, like being able to do things like mentally rotate a picture or find your way from one place to another, there's some evidence in reverse that boys are actually doing better than girls are. Now, some people have taken, like Larry Summers, who was the head of Harvard, have taken that to be an indication of the fact, an explanation of the fact that when you look at science, so what you see is this pattern where essentially girls are doing better than boys all the way up through, nowadays, all the way up through undergraduate school. But when you look at the high reaches of science, you see the reverse. So you still see that in Berkeley, for example, in the science departments, you still see many more men than you see women. And even in our psychology department, psychology is a major that's overwhelmingly women. Many more women are actually taking psychology. There are still fewer female professors in our psychology department than male professors, not to mention the fact that female professors are paid 20% less than male professors. Yeah. Long story, but so one question is, why is it you see these differences, particularly in math and science, in the distribution of scientists? And one hypothesis about this has been that that this was a result of these differences in visual and spatial abilities. But in fact, what you find is that when you change the environment in which girls and boys are learning science, then these differences start to collapse. So what may be true is that if you have a math and science program, for instance, that's heavily weighted towards visual-spatial kinds of problems, then that already is encouraging boys to be part of those programs. And remember, we just saw that from school age, children are enforcing sex-differentiated types of play. So if you start out by saying, okay, this is the kind of thing that the boys do, just by saying this is the kind of thing that the boys do, the boys are going to be more likely to do it, and the girls are going to be more reluctant to do it, whether or not they could actually succeed or not. And yeah. Well, we don't know. I mean, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, about what are the factors that are actually causing these differences. We do know that in those experiments with the infants who are dressed up as the opposite gender, people talk more to a baby if they think it's a girl than if they think it's a boy. So it may partly be that the girls are hearing much more language from early on. Yeah? You can see some signs of it even in childhood, but it seems to really kick in adolescence. And we'll see in a second that there's some suggestion that it might have to do with hormonal developments and changes. In non-human animals, you see hormonal effects on spatial orientation and spatial abilities. But the general important point is, maybe this is suitable, go back to the very beginning of this course. Remember when we had the lecture about phenylketonuria? PKU, when we had a lecture about PKU, remember those are the babies that become retarded unless they have a particular hormone in the environment. And part of the point that I was making then is that it's literally impossible to sort out nature and nurture, because what counts as being nature is going to be different depending on the environment in which you find yourself. So even if you have genetic differences, how those genetic differences actually get expressed, how they turn into adult traits, is going to differ depending on the environment that you're in. And one of the interesting things about human beings is that we can actually go in and change our own environments, so we can make our environment different. So for instance, if you think about this question, which is obviously, I imagine, relevant for lots of people in this class and very relevant to me, about, all right, are men and women really different in their scientific abilities and their abilities to do high-level science of the sort that you see at Harvard? Well, okay, let's think about this. In the Pleistocene, we know that there was no effect of gender on your ability to get a position as a physics professor at Harvard, because there were no physics professors and there was no Harvard. So if you wanted to predict how well you were going to do in science in the Pleistocene based on your gender, there would have been absolutely no relationship at all, because there wasn't any environment in which that was a relevant outcome, right? So it's only when there's a relevant environment that you can even talk about a trait at all. That was one of the things we first talked about in this class. 50 years ago, when my mother was starting out in university, there was an absolutely 100% relationship between whether you were a boy or a girl and whether you did well in mathematics at the University of Pennsylvania, for example, because girls weren't allowed to take mathematics at the University of Pennsylvania. So she wasn't actually allowed to take any of the advanced mathematics courses. So in that environment, what you would see is an incredibly strong relationship between what your gender was and whether you became a physics professor at Harvard. In fact, in those days, until recently, 100% relationship. But of course, there's a very simple explanation for it. If you're never allowed to take any advanced math courses, then you're not going to actually succeed in Harvard. And essentially, what the most recent studies have shown is that as you change the environment in which gender differences are being expressed, then you have different outcomes. So even if you do see differences in something like rough and tumble play or something like mental rotation ability, the question is, what's the route that gets you from, say, a difference in mental rotation ability to a difference in whether you are doing well in math and science classes? And I must say, I always find it a bit striking. I thought about, suppose I did the last couple of slides the opposite way, and I said, well, there's evidence that from very early on boys are better at language than girls are. Girls might show a little advantage in visual spatial abilities. Then I'm absolutely convinced that Lawrence Summers would say, well, language, that's the ability to think in abstractions. It's the ability to get away from just the here and now and think in abstract propositions. So obviously, you have to have high language abilities to be able to do abstract science. Now, visual stuff, you might need that for knitting or embroidery or something like that, but I mean, that's not really something that you need to think in the highest and most abstract way. So what counts as being an example is relevant too. So this brings me to the next part of the talk, which is about what the explanations for gender differences are. And there's a little evidence for differences in brain structure. There's actually more evidence for differences in the effects of sex-related hormones on the developing brain. So most of the places where we actually see biological influences aren't so much about what the brains actually look like, but about the influences of sex hormones. And again, if you remember when we were talking about biological development, essentially what happens is that males become males, not so much because they're born as males, but because being male triggers the production of testosterone and androgen in the womb, and it's really the testosterone and androgen that turns the baby into someone who's biologically male. So if you don't have testosterone and androgen, the baby that comes out, although they'll have an X and Y chromosome, is going to look like a female. So there is some evidence that it's these hormonal effects that are actually also have brain effects. But there's also this effect of children's own conceptions of gender, which is a point that I was making before. So this is this idea of self-socialization. So when children start recognizing that gender is an important category, and they start enforcing it as an important category, then they change what they do to fit what they think is an important category. And we can see that from the time children are in preschool and on into the school age, they are in fact recognizing that these are categories, and they are enforcing the differences between the categories, even when those differences are fairly arbitrary. An interesting thing that I just found out is, for instance, pink was not considered to be the difference between pink and blue as boys and girls colors. That's actually quite recent. It's since the 1920s. If you look in the 19th century, people thought of pink as being just as much a boy's color and blue as being just as much of a girl's color. So there's something where we all feel like, yeah, well, of course pink is the girl's color, blue is the boy's color. And children will enforce, no, you can't wear a pink shirt because it's going to be too girly, but that's just the particular convention we have about gender at the moment. And something that we mentioned before is also about the fact that from the time that babies are born, people, including their parents, are treating them differently depending on whether they're boys or girls. And this is just as true, in fact, even more true for mothers than for fathers, and it's just as true for parents who believe in gender equity as it is for parents who don't. So parents are already kind of discriminating, treating boys and girls differently from very, very early on, all the way back in infancy. Including, in answer to the question before, they tend to have these higher rates of verbal interaction, which might be partly responsible for the fact that the girls are learning more language. But again, I want to emphasize this. Remember what we learned through the whole course, which is that these relationships between nurture and nature are always transactional. So you might, for instance, it may be that you start out with girl babies liking to listen to language a little bit more than boy babies, but because they like to listen to language more, that means that the moms are sort of getting reinforced if they talk to the girl babies, and that means the girl babies are listening to language more, and that's making them like to listen to language more because it's familiar, and then they hear more language, and so on and so forth. So even when you get these differences, it's hard to, so even the sort of flip side of saying the fact that you see differences in how the girls and boys behave doesn't prove that that's not the result of the environment. The opposite is true too. The fact that you see differences in the ways that parents are treating boys and girls doesn't mean that it's just coming from the parents. Usually what's happening is that there's this interaction where differences in the children are getting reinforced by differences in the parents, which are then leading to differences in the children, which are reinforcing the differences in the way the parents treat them and so forth. So I think one good way to think about gender is think of it as being like temperament. Remember when we were talking about temperament, where there really do seem to be these very early temperament differences, but how they play out depends a lot on these cascades of interaction between the babies and the environment. And we also know that teachers are an important factor. In fact, one thing that I do in my seminars is just count the number of times that in a mixed gender seminar, the teachers call on the boys versus calling on the girls, and count the number of times that the boys raise their hands and the girls raise their hands. I don't do it as much anymore, but for a while, whenever I had a smaller class where people were talking a lot, in the first class I'd keep a record of how many times boys raise their hands and girls raise their hands, and then at the end of the class I'd just say, you know something interesting? You know, there's been 70% of the questions that come from the boys and 30% have come from the girls, and then there's this dreadful silence that descends on the class. And unfortunately, I discovered the main effect was then the boys wouldn't say anything for the rest of the term. The girls talk a little bit more, but that turns out to be a very general effect. So again, me, someone who's not consciously trying to do it, still, it turns out, will be more likely to actually call on a boy than call on a girl. And you can definitely see that in the school. Teachers are more likely to ask boys questions than girls. They're more likely to respond to boys' misbehavior, on the other hand, than they are to respond to girls' misbehavior. So it's just like the boys are sort of more visible in the classroom in general as far as the teachers are concerned, and the girls sort of fade away into distance. Yeah? Well, that's a good question. Of course, most teachers are women, so it may have something to do with the gender of the teacher, although they don't really find gender effects, but there are so few male elementary school teachers that it's kind of hard to tell is that because of the kind of men become elementary school teachers. But it certainly is just as true of women as it is of men. Is there another question? And we see, as I said before, we see peer influences. So we see children actually enforcing gender difference themselves. But we also see these cultural influences. So as I mentioned before, in cultures where they've changed the way that they do math and science education, you see much more equality in girls' math and science scores. And in general, in cultures where there's more female participation in the workforce, sort of generally more gender equality, then not too surprisingly, you don't see as many of the differences in achievement or in cognition. So culture isn't the whole story, because even in cultures like ours, where there's a strong explicit value of gender equity, you still see the teachers calling on the boys more than the girls. You still see the female full professors getting paid less than the males. They recently replicated a study where they actually, it's very relevant to you, where they actually got professors to rate a potential lab manager applicant, and the only thing that they did was just change whether it was a boy's name on the top, a girl's name, a man's name, or a woman's name on the top. So these were undergrads applying for lab manager positions, and they discovered that both male and female professors were likely to rank the male name as being more likely to succeed as a lab manager, someone who would prefer to hire, someone who was actually going to do better than exactly the same resume, just with a woman's name on it. So culture is clearly influencing. Some of these explicit cultural factors are influencing the explicit cultural factors are influencing gender roles, but it's always this kind of complicated interaction. So even when you see a great deal of explicit gender equality, you still see these more subtle kinds of cultural factors that are influencing the way that gender equality actually plays out. And we'll talk some more about some of the theories and ideas behind this answer.